Agenda matchups: Base Kaba vs Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, Omni-Man vs Metro Man, and even one of my favorites, Bear Atreus vs Zeus. One aspect of power scaling that is very important is analyzing different forms of media and finding out that what is seen as powerful in one verse might be child's play in comparison to another. For example, we have Homelander. This guy is consistently hyped up by his narrative to be the top dog. He's so powerful that every man, woman, and soup pretty much cucks to his presence alone. But take him out of his verse, what's he gonna do? As Homelander stems from a narrative where the extent of the soup's powers as well as the government's artillery is relatively grounded, and stuff like leveling buildings and cities is seen as impressive. Essentially, he's a big fish in a little pond. For example, if you put someone like Homelander up against Nico Arc, a character who scales the Island Busters and in canon fighting games can survive bombs that can blow up entire galaxies, and you're gonna find yourself with a pretty funny matchup.
これで射程調整 40km 成層圏からの贈り物です。惑星休憩カルバリア・ガルガイン大地に巻かれよ。
With said matchup overall pushing an agenda, that agenda being Homelander's weak, hence why they're called what they are, as they only exist to prove a premise. MV Godzilla is no stranger to these at all, as while he isn't weak in any way, shape, or form, he's often pitted up against some of the strongest characters in the entire franchise due to things that are really circumstantial, like him having better effects or him just being really big. So to kind of counter that, some people have made agenda-based matchups that are there to prove an agenda that while he's strong, there's levels to this. An agenda matchup is different from a stop matchup, as a stop matchup is just a matchup that comes from where the stats are really big and it's not made to push an agenda. Hence why I don't think Heisei Godzilla vs Legendary Godzilla is an agenda matchup, as people genuinely wonder that question and they just don't know the stats gap. An agenda matchup is basically made by someone who knows the stats gap and is just trying to get a quick laugh or prove an agenda. Think of something like the Super X vs Legendary Godzilla, and that's the kind of jive we're going with this video, as we will be covering one of the biggest agenda-based matchups for the entire MV as a whole, as it's against a Showa kaiju. One thing you have to understand is that the Showa era is a very powerful era, like surprisingly so. There was even a popular meme of it like a couple years ago. Despite this though, the verse isn't really respected due to its rinky-dink on-screen showings and relatively cheap effects in comparison to the greater franchise. And the most rinky-dink of all Showa kaijus has got to be the Giant Condor. This guy made his first and only notable appearance in 1967's Ebro Horror of the Deep, where he fights Godzilla for a couple seconds and dies instantly. He's kind of just become a joke character in the fandom for this very reason. It's seeing as how he was boxing with Showa Godzilla, one of the most cracked versions of the character in all of films. A very popular agenda matchup has emerged, being the topic of this very video. Now this won't be the traditional take where I cover both character stats independently and tell you who do I think would win in the end, as I'll be mainly using this video to kind of talk about the history of this matchup as a whole, and I'll be talking about if it's actually close at all to begin with, as both the MV and Giant Condor have gotten some notable buffs since then, with said buffs making this matchup pretty comparable, and it's not as one-sided as any particular party may think. As today we will cover the agenda matchup to end all Godzilla agenda matchups, the Giant Condor versus the Monsterverse. But before that, I would like to advise you guys to subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 50k and we're getting really close, like almost less than 3k now. We cover a whole variety of franchises and IPs, Godzilla, Disney, Finance and Freddy's, pretty much anything you can think of. I just like to cover stuff I like. It's just that simple. Unfortunately for you guys, I like a lot of stuff. So statistically speaking, there's at least one or two things that I've covered or plan to cover. So if you'll be interested in that, be sure to click the subscribe button, as we have the weekly main videos such as the one you're watching right now, as well as the 2 to 3 shorts a week. So yeah, we get a lot of stuff on your feed. But with that e-bang out the way, seriously though, we're really close to 50k. Let's talk about the topic that you guys clicked the video for. I think the best place to start is at the beginning, and while 2014 had its fans, I think the films that really pushed the narrative to the casual audience that MV Godzilla was simply much stronger than he is are the films Godzilla King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong. So I'll be talking about how this matchup was back then and how funny it used to be. So right now we're starting with the 2021 era of Godzilla power scaling. So let's not beat around the bush any longer and explain this matchup how it was back then. So let's just get into the Giant Condor, as I know that's why you all clicked the video. The thing that really carries this guy's scaling in particular is that he fights a Godzilla post Ghidorah the three-headed monster in Invasion of Astro Monster. Back then, we didn't know how strong he was in comparison to what we know now, but even back then, Ghidorah at worst was a surface wiper with the ability to destroy planets in this manner for fun. It's a major plot point for the film in question, with the time frame of this feat being implied to be quick and numerous sources including the film itself, with words and phrases like day and the blink of an eye being used to describe the manner in which he destroyed the planet Venus. So at worst, this would make Ghidorah a multi-continental threat, but even back then we could bump the feat up higher, as he stated to be able to destroy these planets with his gravity beams, which we know destroy matter on a subatomic level due to their destruction of gravity. So as you would imagine, taking the standard value for surface wiping in a quick manner and then stacking on the fact that he destroyed that surface on a subatomic level on top of that, and that would easily yield dwarf star level yields of destruction. This notion is actually pretty consistent, as in the Zone Fighter television show we see the aftermath of Venus, and it's a completely dead planet with like smoke smearing out of it. It has no atmosphere or anything of the sort. But speaking of Zone Fighter, this is where we dive into some consistency, as in this series we see alien civilizations that can essentially vaporize gas giants, and then in the same series these same aliens say that Ghidorah is their greatest prospect for causing destruction. One important thing to note is that the aliens in this television show state verbatim that they literally want to destroy the planet Earth, and they don't seek to conquer or subjugate humanity in any way, shape, or form. So the fact that they say a kaiju is a better chance of getting that objective done than the actual Jupiter destroying nuclear bombs goes a long way for all of the kaiju scaling. So even back then we had some nice dwarf star level to even large star level implications for even mid 60s Showa and kaiju. We had some calc stacking multiplier methods that could get the high tiers in the verse all the way up to solar system level and up, but seeing as how that stuff stems from like Terror of Mechagodzilla and stuff that comes from there, and it really wouldn't help the Giant Condor's case in any way, shape, or form, as he just doesn't scale to that stuff at all. But as previously mentioned, he does scale to some of the 60s era stuff, because the Godzilla that the Giant Condor was fighting was shown to be able to box and overwhelm a character who can destroy planets to a dwarf star level yield, and has some pretty big narrative implications to be more potent than bombs that can vaporize gas giants. So the Giant Condor's performance with all that in mind isn't that bad at all, as yeah, he did get one-sided by Godzilla's atomic breath. He still did give the King of Monsters a decent fight, all things considered. Decent with the context that this guy can press starbuster beings. Funnily enough, we have some official guidebooks and statements. There's not too many, so let me get my reading glasses out and we can examine what Toho themselves has to say about the Giant Condor. Firstly, there's a statement that says that he's large, and it says right here that he's able to rip Godzilla's face off with his claws, and that Godzilla was frenting over his flying foe. Frenting being a word that means he was getting impressed, he was anxious. He's also implied to be able to pierce Godzilla's eyes, and their battle is called a Great Duel of the Seas, and it's even stated that the Giant Condor fought well. So yeah, once again, all things considered, it wasn't that bad of a performance. Now obviously he does downscale, but it's not like he broke his beak against Godzilla's skin. He still hurt the King of the Monsters, made him roar in pain, and could even rip into his skin, whereas Ghidorah's planet-wiping gravity beams could not to a weaker Godzilla than the one that the Giant Condor fought with, due to Godzilla getting stronger every day. So unironically, the Giant Condor would scale anywhere between planetary to even dwarf to large star level. He's also kind of implied to be blatantly faster than Godzilla at this point, which I think is a notion that even the most obnoxious Giant Condor downplayer can agree to. Godzilla at this point in time was able to evade Ghidorah's gravity beams, which are beams of light. But for the sake of consistency, even Anguirus from Godzilla Raids Again could apparently dodge Godzilla's atomic breath, which is stated to be Sharan Club radiation. So on top of his AP, the Giant Condor would also possess relativistic to even FT out combat speeds and reaction times. As for where the MV realistically scaled back then, the speed is pretty comparable, with multiple characters in the verse being able to easily dodge, block, and evade the King of the Monsters' atomic breath, which is also stated to be composed of Sharan Club radiation. But as for AP, it was only really consistently in the multi-continental ranges, with us just having too many instances of this tier of power in verse. Off memory alone, you had Muto Prime's tectonic plate shifting abilities, Godzilla tanking a meteor to the face, Ghidorah being a surface wiper like he was in the Showa era, and so on and so forth. With the god of the verse, thermonuclear Godzilla pushing the moon level ends of AP, and even then it was based off of a very hyperbolic statement that implies Ghidorah got 100 times stronger due to him absorbing the electricity of a power plant in Boston, getting the power of 100 storms and all. We also had some planetary stuff like his Hollow Earth drill, and Burning Godzilla's pulses having planetary calcs based on the subatomic nature of Godzilla's attacks. So overall, it was a very high-end scale for the MV, whereas the Giant Condor at worst was like dwarf star level. Remember, we didn't know too much about the Hollow Earth's energy output other than Godzilla's scale to it. But once again, without the values from Monarch Legacy of Monsters, it didn't really mean anything. So yeah, back in 2021, the Giant Condor without question would have sold the MV and be like a Shimu level threat at worst if he was placed into the Monsterverse, which is a pretty funny sentiment, but that's how the fight went back then. However, since then, we've gotten multiple new projects, comic books, games, television shows, and a whole new movie, in fact. With the show era also given some new buffs as well, due to us looking deeper into it. So I think it's interesting to see how that fight has evolved. Since the topic's inception all the way back in 2021. But before we dive into the scaling chain of current day, I'd like to shed the spotlight on today's sponsor, BC's Collectibles. These guys have been a repeat sponsor here on the channel, and don't skip it because we have a good deal for you guys at home. Seeing as how you clicked on this video, odds are you're a pretty big Godzilla fan. I mean, who else is gonna click a video about the Giant Condor of all things? So I think it's fair enough to assert that you might be at least slightly interested in getting figures of the big guy in all of his rogues gallery. But seeing as how all the major online shops have these figures at super scalped price, and then you got to pay shipping on top of that, buying merch of the big guy might not be the smartest move. But I'm happy to report that's not the case with today's sponsor, Beast of the East, as these guys have been, importing and shipping Godzilla figures all the way from Japan to the States. They have a wide variety of figures from everything kaiju-ega. You're not a big Godzilla fan? That's fine. They got Gamera, Ultraman, Evangelion, even Kaiju number 8. I'm a big fan of the movie Monster series by Bandai and the little figures that they produce, but I didn't know where to get them until I met these guys right here. And these guys were kind enough to ship out to me the Ebra movie Monster series figure. And this guy is simply incredible. Never in my life as a Godzilla fan did I think I would own such a high quality piece of Ebra merchandise. And Beast East, they shipped him in an appropriate manner, and he came in perfectly intact. There are no paint chips, no nothing like that at all. This figure is incredible, and I got him for a great price. Much lower than some of the scalpers be offering him for. And on top of that, Beast East created a discount code for you guys all at home. As if you put Goji-Chronic 5 at your checkout, you'll receive a 5% discount on top of the already great price. So if you would find yourself interested in any of these products, the first link in the description will lead straight to the website. Don't forget to use code Goji-Chronic 5 to save 5% on your next purchase. Thank you, Beast East, for sponsoring today's video. And just like that, let's hop right back into the matchup. The year is 2024, and obviously a lot has changed. But has this matchup? We'll talk about that in a second. But as I alluded to, both parties have gotten an evolution in their scaling. We'll talk about the Giant Condor last, as the MV has gotten some more stuff anyways, so yeah. In between the downtime of both of these films right here, the planetary to dwarf star level ranges for MV really became solidified. Whereas it was kind of just a single calc or two back then, we have numerous instances of this being the case in current day. From Ghidorah being called a planet destroyer by the author of the novelization, Godzilla's atomic breath being stated to be the strongest force in the universe. We started to get a quantifiable value for the Hollow Earth, right? So that previous statement of Godzilla's scaling to it in base became really notable to his overall scaling. At a low end, we know that the small pockets now can produce 15 pentatons worth of energy, upscaling that for the model seen in GVK, and it's been determined that Godzilla in a resting base weaker than even himself in King of the Monsters would have relative energy output to what would be required to destroy a dwarf star. But that's the low end value, right? For a high end value, it stated in the same show that we get that 15 petaton output, that the Hollow Earth's energy is relative to what you would find in supermassive black holes. Now obviously that's a high end scale, I'm not gonna lie, but it's there. But at this point in time, MV Godzilla and pretty much anyone who scales to him, Kong, Ghidorah, Mechagodzilla, maybe even Muto Prime, would find themselves in the large planetary to dwarf star level ranges, with that high end being solar system level. But if you want to argue that, that's your business. I'm a little rusty on how the MV scales inverse. I haven't scaled like the individual characters in a minute, so if you want to know who really scales to that dwarf star level stuff, I recommend you check out these two videos here. They cover the Monsterverse's collective inverse scaling and ranking system, both pre-GXK and post-GXK, so they're pretty fun watches. It's around an hour long put together, so yeah, I'm gonna link it in the description down below. So whereas in 2021, the MV was looking around multi-continental to like maybe planetary. Those planetary ends became the low ball, and solar system level became the new like planetary, as where it was like maybe, but probably not. Personally, I like to argue like the top tiers to be pretty deep in the dwarf star level, as that value is based off of Godzilla from GVK, who's not as strong as he was during King of the Monsters. And then you go to GXK and Godzilla's back to his full base, if not even stronger, and then becomes super stronger to the point where he evolves, and then he can stack his supercharged multiplier on top of his evolved state. So yeah, I would have the top tiers such as Godzilla and Shimu and like that dwarf star level plus range of AP consistently. But what about the Giant Condor? How has he evolved? Because I know a lot of you guys are interested in that, and don't worry, we'll get to that right now. There's two ways we can do this, the funny way and the probably a little bit more consistent way. I'll start with the funny way first, because yeah, that's probably what you want to hear. Before that though, we gotta establish that the Giant Condor scaling chain has become even better, because if you remember, a lot of Ghidorah's scaling came from the fact that he had a lot of good narrative implications from Zone Fighter, but we now know that the Ghidorah seen in Zone Fighter is in fact a second Ghidorah who's weaker than the original Ghidorah from that trilogy of movies in the 60s. Now obviously the Condor doesn't scale to anything from Destroy All Monsters. Heck, I don't think a lot of 70s things scale to Destroy All Monsters in general due to it being like 20 years in the future. But the fact that this Ghidorah is weaker than the Ghidorah from those two 60s films would go a long way for the Giant Condor scaling. And we found some new stuff on the original 64 Ghidorah as well, such as the fact that Ghidorah is born from the destruction of a star/planet. So off rip, that's like planetary to star level durability for the Showa Ghidorah. He's also stated to convert cosmic rays into energy. Since we know that cosmic rays come from exploding stars and supernovas, that means that this guy literally eats freaking supernovas for breakfast. And keep in mind, this is the low end stuff. This is the casual stuff that he gets just by eating and existing. So it's fair enough to say that Showa Godzilla would scale to that, and by extension the Giant Condor would as well. Oh, I started with the more realistic way of scaling the Giant Condor. Yeah, that's right. My bad. I was supposed to do the funny way, but the realistic scaling chain for the Giant Condor is anywhere between star to solar system level. So let's get to the goofy stuff now. Ghidorah is confirmed to be unrivaled and invincible in space during this time period of the mid-60s as well. This is important as the Garago existed canonically in verse, and they have kaiju at their disposal that are fourth dimensional, and they also possess the power to raise the dimensionality of the planet by, the fourth. And this isn't just some random phrase that, the creators of Zone Fighters threw in because it sounded neat, as we actually get the opportunity to explore the fourth dimension in the Showa universe, and it's a separate space-time with a higher dimensionality than the base cosmology, and high-tech alien instruments cannot really help navigate this area. So yeah, it's probably unironically a fourth dimensional space. And the fact that the same show can label kaiju to have that same level of dimensionality that the Showa Ghidorah would upscale even as early as the 60s time period would mean that Ghidorah is possibly even Universal Plus in his original appearance. And it's not even inconsistent, as the weaker inferior Ghidorah that's in Zone Fighter is also stated to be stronger than their fourth dimensional kaiju. So Godzilla would scale to the OG Ghidorah even in the 60s duology, and the Giant Condor could hurt him and pierce his hide. You kind of do the math. I'm not sure if I'd argue that this scaling chain is the most consistent for the Giant Condor, but hey, if a lot of MV fans are so adamant that Godzilla scales to things like gamma ray bursts, supermassive black holes, and even Superman, then hey, why not? As for something that is consistent and not wank as it's pretty, just set in stone, we also know now that Ghidorah's flight speed would put him in the MFTL plus ranges of speed, as he's been able to make the trip from the Space Hunter Nebula M to Earth in a very quick manner pretty consistently throughout the entire franchise. The Space Hunter Nebula M is stated to be 38,000 light years away from the planet Earth, totally disregarding the screen time, where it's like a couple of minutes, and assuming that he took like a day to make this trip, this would still be like hundreds of thousands of times the speed of light. It's important to establish that this crazy value scales to his reaction time and attack speed, as in Zone Fighter, once again, Ghidorahs are shown to be able to fly in space while fighting and, combating their opponents. So if this weaker Ghidorah could, this stronger Ghidorah probably could as well. Once again, Godzilla scales, and so does the Giant Condor, and that's just kind of how it goes. So as you can see, the Giant Condor is unironically like higher than the MV, whether you use low ball ends or high ball ends. It seems the Giant Condor is one step ahead. or an entire tier of dimensionality ahead if you kind of buy into the super high-end stuff. The only consistent way I think you could get MV Godzilla and the Giant Condor to be a comparable matchup is if you kind of highball MV Godzilla to solar system level and then downplay the Condor to like the star level ranges, which I mean, I don't know why you would do that, but I mean, to each their own. And considering the stats gap and the consistency of both verses, it's just that, yeah, the Giant Condor would more than likely, even to this day, solo the entire Monsterverse. But with that sentiment out the way, I have to ask myself, why did I make this video? Well, firstly, it's pretty funny. I mean, come on. But secondly, I chose to make this video to try to push the idea to kind of look into the verses that you want to power scale. Anyone who's doing versus matchups has to understand this fundamental concept. When doing a cross-verse matchup, you have to analyze the feats and statements of each verse, because what is portrayed to be strong in one verse may be weak in another, and vice versa. Like this video, for example, you have high tiers in the Monsterverse who are portrayed to be like these gods amongst humans, and then you have the show era where like the low tier joke characters would probably solo the MV based on the power scaling of the verse. So yeah, to all the MV fans, sorry, I didn't mean it. I thought this matchup was closer, unironically. I did not expect there to be scans that said that the Giant Condor could pierce Godzilla's hind, and being able to do that is just kind of a crazy feat. I'll give you one example of how this is applicable. Ghidorah's gravity beams are stated to be the most powerful weapons in the verse verbatim, and then you have Godzilla who's shot with these gravity beams, and he's, you know, it hurts him, but it didn't pierce his skin, whereas the Giant Condor's beak can. Monsterverse Godzilla is not piercing Showa Godzilla's hind, he's just not. So with that being said, the winner of today's matchup is the Giant Condor. He was the winner back then, he's the winner to this day. But yeah, that's the video. What'd you guys think? Did I wank the Giant Condor? Am I the world's first Giant Condor tard? Or do you think that this was about what you expected? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And before you click off the video, we have a very important announcement. The Gifts for Goji initiative is still live. You should see the fundraiser, you know, thing under the title of the video. So if you're inclined, be sure to drop some funds if you can spare anything. All the money goes straight to St. Jude's, where they will provide for the relocation and research of cancer so that they can help kids, you know, beat cancer. So, you know, that is always going to be open for probably the rest of the month. But once again, thank you guys for watching the video. And as always, I'll see you guys next week. But until then, stay big G fans.